A warm welcome to our viewers in Europe and to our viewers here in the United States. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and it's my pleasure to serve as today's host. For decades, the American Council on Germany has facilitated the exchange of ideas and experiences between German and American decision makers at the local level. We've done this to help practitioners share best practices and to collaborate in the development of policy solutions to common challenges. We do this through hands-on, immersive experiences, such as fellowships, study tours, and other exchanges. But with the pandemic, it's much more difficult to travel or to convene in person. But today's technology makes it possible to connect communities on both sides of the Atlantic like we are right now. The ACG has often hosted mayors and other state and local officials for policy discussions. But this year, we've launched an initiative called Virtual Transatlantic Town Halls, German-American Mayors Forum. This series is designed to engage the mayors of German and American sister cities so that they can discuss the current issues confronting their respective cities and how they are preparing for the future. Today's event is being held as part of WunderbarTogether USA 2020, a comprehensive and collaborative initiative funded by the German Federal Foreign Office and administered by the Goethe-Institut. We are delighted to partner with the mayor's offices of St. Louis and Stuttgart, as well as the St. Louis-Stuttgart Sister Cities Organization and the World Trade Center of St. Louis, to bring you today's conversation with Mayor Lyda Krewson and Oberbürgermeister, or Lord Mayor, Fritz Kuhn. Mayor Krewson, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and Lord Mayor Kuhn, it's so good to see you again.
And Mayor Kuhn, herzlich willkommen.
Let me first thank you for this setting up in this virtual town hall meeting with my colleague, Lyda Krewson. I really appreciate the work you are doing, and please allow me to switch to German now in the discussion, because then I can say more.
Absolutely. So our viewers should not be surprised when they hear an interpreter a little bit later as we get into the meat of our conversation. Since we only have an hour, let me keep my introductions very brief. In April of 2017, Mayor Krewson won a historic election to become the first woman to serve as the mayor of St. Louis. She has focused intently on public safety and also led the effort to pass a proposition supporting a half-cent sales tax to provide salary and benefit increases for police and firefighters, as well as financial support for summer jobs, recreation for kids, mental health, and the demolition of vacant buildings. Mayor Kuhn was elected Lord Mayor of Stuttgart in 2012. Prior to that, he served as a member of the German Bundestag for the Green Party for a decade. In his time as mayor, Mr. Kuhn has pushed the city forward in the areas of sustainable mobility, car-free city centers, and climate protection, as well as various action plans. This year, St. Louis and Stuttgart are celebrating the 60th anniversary of their sister city relationship, which was established in 1960 after the then mayor of St. Louis visited Stuttgart during a European trip, and some German exchanges of social workers from Stuttgart to St. Louis had taken place. Created to encourage people-to-people and government-to-government interaction, since then, numerous exchanges have taken place between the two cities that have included business and government leaders, as well as medical professionals, high school and university students and faculty, choral groups, chamber musicians, ballet troupes, orchestras, and athletes. Today, we'd like to hear more about the sister city relationship and what has made it so successful, but we'd also like to talk about how both cities have handled the challenges posed by the pandemic and how both cities are addressing the issues surrounding climate change. Let's start by talking a little bit about the sister city partnership between St. Louis and Stuttgart. Why is this relationship important for each of your cities? And what impact has it had on your communities? Mayor Krewson, why don't you start?
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate that. Our sister city relationship, which, by the way, Stuttgart was St. Louis's very first sister city relationship. So going back these 60 years, I believe one of the best things that it's done is, of course, to foster the people-to-people relationship. So much more can be accomplished when we are all working together. So that certainly has been a very, very major impact with the exchanges that we do between high school students, the exchanges that we've done with art and with music have all been to our cultural benefit. So certainly that has been very important. I would also say that, you know, there are many businesses in St. Louis who are either now currently associated, affiliated, or owned with companies in Germany. And of course, way back in the day, our own Anheuser-Busch company was founded by two individuals who were from Germany. And I know that there is a Budvar in Germany as well. So our heritage and our history goes way back. It's important that we maintain those people to people and those social relationships. And I think that's the biggest advantage to this sister city relationship. It has endured over 60 years, hopefully for another 60 years. And I'm sorry that we weren't able to get together this year because of the pandemic, but certainly this Zoom or this electronic is good, but I look forward to next year us being able to come together and really meet in person.
These kinds of meetings will never take the place of those people-to-people and interpersonal exchanges. But I can't help but think how lucky we are to have this technology today, because if the pandemic had hit, say, 10 years ago, we'd really be stuck. We wouldn't even be able to see each other in this way.
Absolutely right.
For Stuttgart, the sister city relationship with St. Louis is also one of the first. My research showed me that Stuttgart developed sister city relationships immediately after World War II with Liverpool and shortly thereafter with Cardiff. But in 1960, the very next of its 10 sister city relationships was with St. Louis. So Mayor Kuhn, I'd like to ask you what some of the highlights have been from Stuttgart's perspective. And if you could maybe share with us a little bit about what the cities are doing to celebrate the anniversary of this sister city relationship.
So
I would actually like to look back to 1960. So that was 15 years after the Second World War, and the people in Stuttgart, they of course were focused a lot on the USA because we were a city of the garrisons, and the majority of the population was very glad about the help of the Americans in Stuttgart. So our society was really open to this partnership with St. Louis. And because they were really curious, so we were really interested in the US. I back then lived in the Allgäu area, in a rural area, and we had an aunt in Boston, and once in a year she sent us a package from the US with chewing gum, and that was something completely exciting back then, with cowboy outfits and so on, and all of these crazy and colorful clothes. So we were the kings in my town when we were wearing this. So what I want to say with that is that the foundation or establishment of our relationship was at a time, or started at a time, when people were crazy about St. Louis, Missouri, about America. And this is also why this relationship was driven that in that way, because so many people were curious, and the cities have a lot of things in common, like the automotive industry, a lot of science and research, the publishing houses, and so on. So it's really true that both cities are interesting business locations, and also cities of music. When I read that Miles Davis is from St. Louis, so the jazz musician, I was really enthused to hear about that, because my first, well, CD back then was Witch's Brew by Miles Davis. So I'm talking about these things, not just to tell you some stories about myself, but just to give people an idea of the time back then when this relationship and town twinning started. And since then, so many exchanges, student exchange programs took place, sports exchanges, scientific exchanges, business delegations visiting each other, and so on. So this is really a great exchange happening between the two populations. And actually, we also have a great program this year. We have a brochure, and we have a different well, programs that we had developed. And then the COVID pandemic hit us, and this is why we're now sitting in front of the screens. But yes, that's right. It's great that we still have these monitors and screens right now. I mean, maybe later on we'll talk about digitization, but it's great to see that this is possible. And of course, it's in the morning now in St. Louis, it's the afternoon and evening in Germany, and still it's possible to meet, and this is so great, and I'm really grateful to this. And I would like to thank the team in St. Louis and my own team in Stuttgart.
Let me maybe follow up with a question to both of you. As somebody who's lived in different cities in Germany and here in the US, I've often gotten somewhat involved with sister city relationships and found that there was often sort of a champion at the beginning who wanted to take the lead and make a connection, often with their home community. But that over time, the sister city relationship has sort of, waned a little bit. It doesn't sound that way at all when I think about the connection between St. Louis and Stuttgart. And I think it might be interesting for some of our viewers to hear a little bit about what kinds of programs you've been engaged in to keep the relationship alive over the years.
Also, ich finde, dass sich das
So I do think that this is something that will always change, and it has been changing. At the beginning, it was just exciting to have this relationship, and in the Americans in Stuttgart, well, they lived in Stuttgart, they were in the garrisons, and they opened to the city, and the city was open to them. And music, for example, was important. So the Americans, they had music clubs in the city and so on. And now, today, well, let me jump to this day. It's a completely different type of relationship. It's important for students, for example, students going to St. Louis, and for these kids, it's an exciting trip. It's great for them to get to know the city in Missouri. And then, of course, they have a very positive image of this transatlantic relationship, but they also understand and get to know the people there and what it really looks like there in Missouri. And if I see some students from the US or from other partner cities that we have, it's the same. It's just a great that you really get to know the people there. And a lot of friendships were created. And if you are a 14 or 15-year-old kid and you went to this other city, this is just something that stays with you. And I think if you want to promote the transatlantic relationships, then you need to make sure that many, many people go from Stuttgart to St. Louis and from St. Louis to Stuttgart. There is nothing better, because this will stay with you your entire life.
Thank you, Mayor Krewson. Yeah, go ahead.
Certainly, I absolutely agree with that. Having that personal relationship is so important. And I also think that for young people to travel to Germany or to a foreign country is very transformative in their lives. Back when I was a young person, that's been a while ago, you know, transatlantic travel for kids, for 15-year-olds really just did not happen. But today, most of our kids do travel, and I think our world is better for it because it affects them for the rest of their lives. I think that what travel does for a young person or an older person for that matter is it makes us realize that despite any political disagreements that we may have, people are people. And when people, we all have the same desires, the same wants, the same needs. We want to be able to provide for our family, support our families, have a nice life, and be able to support ourselves. And sometimes if you have not been to another country, there's an idea that we are different, when in fact, we are all the same. And that the good for that down the road is that doing business with one another is not about two companies doing business. It's about people getting together and doing business together, which of course benefits all of us. So I think that, you know, looking back, the world is quite different today than it was in 1960. But the exchange is so important to our own personal development and to the way we see the world and the way we approach issues. So I think it's just very important that we have been able to do that over the years. And I would just say that our relationship here in St. Louis, of course, I don't know what it was like in 1960, but it has really been kept alive by a woman named Suzanne Evans, who I think many of you know, who is the champion of our sister city relationship with Stuttgart. And I think she brings it alive for all of us and makes sure that that this relationship is good. I would venture to say that our relationship with Stuttgart is the best sister city relationship that we have here in St. Louis. We love all of our other sister cities too, but our closeness with Stuttgart is the best.
Let me maybe follow up then with a question I was planning to ask further along in the conversation, but I think that this point sort of that you just made lends itself to this question. Are there any lessons from your sister city relationship with Stuttgart that you can apply to other sister city relationships to make them stronger?
That's an interesting question. I think it has to do with making sure that you have someone in your home city who continues to keep that front and center with you, and making the time to do it. Like so many things in life, we all have many, many pulls on our time, but making the time to develop those relationships.
And Mayor Kuhn, Stuttgart has 10 sister city relationships. Are there any lessons that you are learning in one of those bilateral relationships that maybe has applications for other sister city partnerships?
Well, yes, as you said, we have 10 of these relationships, and partly with really exciting and complicated cities such as Mumbai in India or Cairo in Egypt. And I actually observed that the partnership that we have with St. Louis, or also Lodz in Poland, are more intensive in a certain way because the encounters repeat that we have for our students or citizens. And what's most important beyond all of the theory and the programs is the face-to-face meetings. And I can see this in all of our partnerships. So our people in Stuttgart and the young people in Stuttgart, they have 10 different options to get to know the world. And this is such a great bunch of flowers, if you will, that we have for them. And let me repeat, really traveling there as part of the program, not just being a tourist and looking around, but being part of a well-developed program. I mean, it's called Sister Cities. We have a great program, and you get to know so many things that you would never get to know as a tourist or if you just went there on your own. So a 16-year-old just gets an inside view of the city of St. Louis, and he could never get that in any other way, even if he goes there to study at the university. But this is just the best way to get to know a city in such a short period of time through this great program.
Thank you. We've touched on the pandemic a little bit, and it certainly brings challenges, particularly when you had plans to get together to celebrate this anniversary. But I think COVID-19 in many ways is also a sobering reminder that cities all over the world face common challenges, and how one deals with something like a pandemic is a common challenge. And so I'd like to maybe switch gears a little bit and talk about how each of your cities is coping with the pandemic, and about some of the challenges that you've faced over the past few months, but also what the prospects are for the coming months. Mayor Krewson, let's start with you. Not only did St. Louis need to confront a public health crisis, but the death of George Floyd in May resulted in large protests. How has St. Louis dealt with the simultaneous public health, economic, and social justice crises that have unfolded over the past few months?
Well, I think, thank you for that question. I mean, this is a multiple pandemics, quite honestly. And so just taking the COVID pandemic to begin with, you know, our country has struggled because we have not had a national response to the pandemic like many other countries have had. And in fact, we have not even had a whole state response. There's 6.5 million people in the state of Missouri. And so it has been a city by city, county by county response to the pandemic. And, you know, the challenge, of course, is that you have people that are ill and community spread, more people that are getting ill. And you want to, we very early on implemented a stay-at-home order. We closed non-essential businesses. That was very tough because, of course, the economic impact of that. We have a requirement for everyone to wear masks. And I'm talking about in the city of St. Louis now, a requirement for everyone to wear masks, to social distance, and of course, hand washing and all of the infection control procedures. In part because we have had a bit of a fragmented response to COVID. For St. Louisans, the vast majority of them have followed those requirements. But, you know, our country is divided on many things, differences of opinion, which is something that we certainly respect and appreciate about one another in America. But on this score, it is, and it continues to be difficult to get compliance with the mask mandates. So that, of course, has been a big challenge. Making sure that our hospitals have enough capacity has been a challenge, although in the city of St. Louis, we have done very well with both of those things. But we know that our outlying counties and areas around us, you know, have not had similar requirements. So, you know, that has been a challenge, and we continue to provide PPE, masks, gloves, gowns, all the things that are needed. We provide those to our nursing homes, to our schools, to any of the places where, you know, you have co-living, congregate living facilities, to be sure that we can tamp down the spread. We've provided testing. The city of St. Louis was the first city in the Midwest really to provide free testing, no questions asked. In other words, you didn't have to have symptoms. So that has been very important to our response. But if, then that segues into, of course, there's an economic crisis, and people lost their jobs. People had their hours reduced. Small businesses have been extremely stressed. Some of them have gone out of business. And so our focus has been on spending our federal dollars that we received to help people. It's all about getting direct service to people. So helping people to stay in their homes or their apartments with rental assistance and mortgage assistance programs, helping people with utility assistance, helping small businesses with grants. Even small grants can make a big difference to a small business. So getting those funds in the hands of people who really needed it and continue to need it. Because I will say, when this started for us back in March, 7 months ago, I don't think any of us believed that we would still be in the grips of this pandemic and that we would be undergoing in our country a third spike in cases. 7 months ago, I would have thought that maybe this would have been better by now. So all of these things continue to be challenges, and I think our city has faced it with a lot of strength. We've made the hard decisions, and we've benefited from that because the number of new cases that we have here in the city of St. Louis is much lower than in other areas of our state. That being said, we still work on that every single day to avoid having more people get ill. So those were a couple of your questions. And then, of course, as you mentioned, with the killing of George Floyd back in May, and even a bit before that, we have seen hundreds of protests here in the city of St. Louis and across the country. I know it's all over the national news, and you know,
And the international news.
And the international news. Yes, that's a very good point. In America and in St. Louis, we respect the First Amendment. We respect everyone's right to protest. We respect their right to be heard, and we are listening to that. America has a very difficult history with race. It's a history that most of us are not proud of. And there are many changes that have been made, but many more changes that will be made and that need to be made. And so those protests have, everyone is listening. We're trying to make those changes, but they also are a big stress on businesses, on law enforcement, on people that are affected by them. So it is a challenging situation, but we have to sort of stand back a bit and understand why these protests are taking place, and recognize that in our country over hundreds of years, many changes, systemic changes have come about because of protests. And so it's part of our world right now. And so the COVID crisis, the economic crisis, the social justice crisis are all coming together, and they're all important.
And they're definitely intertwined at this current moment that we live in. And I think, and this is something we may get into a little bit later in the conversation, that the public health crisis has exacerbated or exposed some of the inequities that have existed in the US, but elsewhere as well, in a way that has really increased awareness around these issues. And so this is, in many senses, an inflection point, certainly for us here in the US, and one that we'll be working on as we try to come out from these multiple crises in a better place than we were when we went into them.
Right. If I could just add one comment, and that is that, of course, the COVID crisis has been exacerbated by the ongoing decades and decades crisis in the way we deliver health services in our country. And so we took the impact on minorities of COVID has been much higher than on whites, but it is also a result of decades-long disparity in how we deliver health services. And so we all know that underlying health conditions, if you have underlying health conditions, that you likely have a worse outcome with COVID. If you're living in a situation with multi-generational people in the home, in a dense situation, if you're working in an essential service job, so you're going to work every day, then you are exposed more, you expose other people more, and you may have underlying conditions and not as good of access to healthcare. So it's a very complex situation.
It is indeed. And let me bring Mayor Kuhn in as well. I mean, obviously the situation in Germany is a little bit different. There's a different healthcare system. Germany fared quite a bit better during the first wave of the pandemic. But as is the case here in the US, as we head into the fall, Germany now seems to be experiencing a second wave of cases. And so I think it would be interesting for our viewers to hear a little bit from you about how Stuttgart has responded to the pandemic itself. But related to that, in Germany, there have also been some anti-COVID lockdown protests, one of the first of which actually took place in Stuttgart as long ago as June. Can you talk a little bit about that movement of sort of anti-COVID protesters and how the city has responded to that as well?
So first of all, let me say that, of course, for people in Germany and Europe and the city of Stuttgart, COVID is a massive challenge. Well, starting in March, we've only been dealing with this one issue. I was head of the crisis management team, and I spend hours every day to find the best solutions. Well, in Germany, compared to the surrounding nations, we are still faring quite well. We have less deaths and fewer people infected, but we can also see that now with fall and winter, with temperatures getting colder, we are seeing a second spike, and this is a growth that is really troubling us. So we need to do a lot. We already reduced public life. We want to avoid complete lockdown if that's possible, and this is something that's going to be decided in the next couple of weeks, whether this will be possible or not to avoid this. We have a couple of advantages in our country. Let's start with Berlin. We have a government and a chancellor, Ms. Merkel, who really cares and works a lot, and she also understands the matter, and she's not just talking. So the political leadership from the federal government down to the states and the towns is really nice. We cooperate well. We have conferences with all of the mayors and the chancellor and the state leaders. So this is taken seriously. And secondly, I believe that our public health system, well, of course, it's true that we saved some money in recent years, but it's still a very good system. So we have big hospitals with a lot of space for people. So far, we haven't had problem with the capacity in the hospitals for seriously ill people. And we also expanded capacities of hospitals. And I can just tell you that it's really decisive to make sure that if you want to be a democratic state with a rule of law, that you understand the health system and the social component of this health system, because we need to have access to hospitals for all people. That's important. You shouldn't just have rich people going to the great clinics and the others can't die. No, it's really a social challenge for all of us. And of course, I can see that it's the same in the US. And you also asked about the protesters. Yes, we have critics. About 10% of German population say that, well, Corona, that's just something you use to terrorize us. That's all just crazy with your masks and so on. And of course, they protest and because they don't want to wear the masks. And this is also linked to the craziest theories that, you know, Bill Gates wants to destroy us, and this is why he invented COVID and so on. So all of these crazy conspiracy theories. But we have the rule rule of law, and we are a democratic system. So of course people can protest and view their opinion, but of course they also have to abide by the rules. They have to keep social distance and so on, because they benefit from 90% of the population abiding by these rules, being cautious and being reasonable. And we actually also have to ask the 10% of people to do that. It's not really easy all of the time, but we try to achieve it in Germany. And this is why I prefer to talk about the reasonable 90% than the 10% who don't like the measures. I do not tolerate if people in Stuttgart just, are very close together without wearing the face masks and posing a risk to everyone else. And it's also important to understand that in Stuttgart or Germany, the people denying COVID-19 also work together with neo-Nazis, with rightist movements. Not all of them are rightist in their thinking, of course, but there are some links that trouble us, because if this doubts about the vaccination and the face masks is linked with these rightist ideas, then it's really, really difficult to come to terms with this. And this is why we have to take a very close look at this.
Thank you. I'd like to remind our viewers that if you have questions for either mayor, you can pose them by using the chat function in Zoom, and I will do my best to fold your questions into the conversation. You've both touched on some of the social challenges posed by the pandemic, and I'd like to drill down on one issue a little bit before we move on to another subject. Communities in both of our countries have been dealing with something called the digital divide, as everybody is forced to work from home, whether it's high school students or elementary students, college students, or whether it's professionals. And so the question comes up of how do we ensure that citizens have equal access to broadband, but also to the hardware that they need, whether it's computers or tablets, in order to be successful in their education and in their professional lives. From other conversations we've had, it's been clear that the pandemic did not cause the digital divide, but that it has exacerbated some structural deficits that exist in communities on both sides of the Atlantic. And I'd like to maybe ask each of you to briefly tell us how your cities are trying to close the digital divide and whether there are any lessons that can be learned from that.
So I'll go first on that. Certainly the pandemic has brought to light the extreme of the digital divide. In our city, broadband access is available everywhere, but it's also expensive. So, even if you can pay to have it, you then need the device, whether that's a phone or a tablet or a computer, but you also need to have the education to use those devices. Very hard, I think, for anyone to do their work from a phone. You've got to at least have a tablet or a laptop. Many of our big businesses have stepped up and equipped their employees with that hardware. But when you go to thinking about kids trying to learn remotely, and families trying to manage, moms at one end of the kitchen table working from home, and a couple of kids are at the other end of the kitchen table, all vying for broadband access, and kids needing help. I think it's a very serious social issue to have everyone home. There's no doubt we have worked with the school systems to try to be sure that they have the tablets or the computers that are needed. We have worked with them to try to be sure that the families have some access to broadband. But frankly, it's still, people that are better off still have better access, better equipment, better training, better resources. You can't just hand someone a laptop or hand them a Chromebook or an iPad and say, here you go, now you've got everything you need. Because what most of us need is that person, that helper, the tutor, that someone when it doesn't work to help us figure that out. So, you know, in our country, we don't consider the internet or broadband access to be a utility. And I think there are many of us who think that, you know, having access to that should be like having access to electricity or natural gas or water. But we're not there yet. And this has really exacerbated it. Now, looking on the other side of this, I think certainly as we go forward over the next 5 years, we're going to see big changes. I think there's no doubt we have to see big changes in access. And so the conversation, which was fairly slow before this, we knew these differences existed, but now it's just front and center. And so I think those conversations will speed up, and we will have in 5 years from now, it'll be one of the good outcomes from this pandemic.
Thank you. Mayor Kuhn.
Es ist ja so, Krisen wie
Well,
Covid
crises such as COVID are challenges, and they cause a lot of damage. But when it comes to digitization for everyone, we have a real boost in Stuttgart now. When we had the complete lockdown of schools and nursing centers and in many companies, then people suddenly asked about all of the video conferences. And we were really looking at who can offer this and whether we have the technology. And we saw that we were lagging behind. We were not really good at this. So there were a lot of weaknesses. And because of COVID-19, we have been learning very fast. So we have political programs in the states and also in the federal government that we can implement to make sure that we get the funds for iPads or laptops, especially for those kids who cannot afford them. And we also see learning curves. I saw examples where kids were really quick to understand that technology once they got the device, and sometimes they also have to help their teacher understand the devices. But that's not really a problem. It's really also good for the kids if they can show their teachers how it works, if they are not able to do that, because that's so good for their confidence. If they are able to show the clever teacher something, and the other way around, of course, the teacher can then teach in a better way. Now, let me put it this way. It's quite difficult if you have to find something positive in such a crisis as COVID. But if we can't do this at all, then it's definitely that we can see major leaps in digitization. And also the working environments are going to change. The big banks and insurance companies in Stuttgart, they all started to work from home, and now they are asking why shouldn't we always be doing this? And we can also see that that this also influences the property market and the real estate market. So digitization is rising, is gaining speed. And in a democracy, again, we have to make sure that everyone has the same access, just as with the healthcare system that I mentioned. So, of course, it's an acid test for democracies because they need to make sure that everyone can participate. And of course, I hope that we will be able to achieve this, because democracies are also social projects. And I would hope for everyone to understand this and make sure that everyone has access.
I'd like to turn to climate change. Both cities are signatories of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy and have pledged to gather data regarding greenhouse gas emissions, to set emissions reduction targets, identify climate hazards, assess climate risks and vulnerabilities, and develop a climate action plan to address mitigation as well as climate adaptation plans. The pledge included a multi-year commitment that was tracked in phases through the award of earned badges over time. Mayor Kuhn, let's start with you. Can you talk a little bit about some of the highlights of Stuttgart's climate action plan, when you started the plan, what some of the major initiatives have been, and how you've defined success?
Im Dezember 2019.
In December in 2019, the City Council of Stuttgart, after my proposal, adopted a big climate protection package. And additionally, we want to spend 200 million euros on that. This is for photovoltaic systems, for example, on roofs. In 2 years' time, we want to have all of the schools equipped with these PV systems, for example. And we're also trying to improve insulation of houses. We want to boost e-mobility. We want to make sure that the climate relevant issues are considered everywhere. Let me give you an example. Now, if we have a public tender for the building of a new, the construction of a new building of the city of Stuttgart, then we even count in the rising CO2 prices today to make sure that the more expensive variant or version or offer is maybe taken if the CO2 emissions are lower. So these are good instruments that we use. And also when it comes to nutrition in the cafeterias of the city of Stuttgart or in schools, we try to use local produce and not the apples from Australia, because that's crazy in terms of climate protection. Because, I mean, we have a lot of apples around here, as far as I know. So we don't have to import them from New Zealand or Australia. So climate protection across the board. In 2030, we want to avoid 65% of CO2 emissions, and if possible, even more. In Germany, Fridays for Future, of course, push this issue a lot, and we need to improve when it comes to climate change. Of course, I'm also a founding member of the Green Party 40 years ago, but I personally believe that the climate crisis is the biggest challenge that we will have to face all over the world. And if we don't act now, then the effects will be dramatic. You can see this with the droughts, with the storms in summer already today. And I can only tell you, I mean, I'm 65 years old now, but I do understand the impatience of the young people on the streets, because they say, well, of course, everyone who's 65 years old now, well, they've had a nice life, but what about us? We don't know what it's going to look like here in 30 or 40 years' time. So please act now. And we have been trying to do this. Of course, we want to do even more, and we need to do even more. There is a big movement in this direction in Stuttgart. And I can only tell you that climate protection is worthwhile. This is really an important thought, I think, because I believe that with green ideas, let me call that green ideas, they can also help you to make a profit, to make some money. So you don't have to think that it's just expensive and now with COVID we cannot afford it at all. That's wrong, because we need this transformation now. For example, in the automotive industry, if we're now able to opt for this new type of mobility, will we have the chance to make a profit too? Because, of course, we also see a structural crisis in some technologies in Stuttgart, for example, in the automotive industry, in addition to COVID-19. So we need to be brave, and we need to use all of our technological know-how to combat climate change. And we should not think whether it's possible, but how we can do it. And I really hope, because there were times when California was the ecological El Dorado for us. It, in some parts still is, but I'm really looking forward to the time when we have transatlantic relations that we also understand as a relationship combating climate change.
The economic dimension is a great segue to Mayor Krewson. I understand that your predecessor had St. Louis join the Global Covenant in 2015, And I read that the city's climate protection initiative takes very much an interdisciplinary approach, focusing on environmental, social, but also economic benefits. Can you share with us a little bit what St. Louis's efforts have been in this regard?
Well, certainly. I mean, St. Louis, among cities, has been a leader, and we've been recognized. We are right now a Bloomberg Climate Challenge city. And so having some technical assistance from the Bloomberg Foundation has been a very helpful thing to us. But our approach is really a triple bottom line sustainability approach. And I think everyone has this to some extent, but certainly we want it to be a win for the climate. We want it to be a win social, and we want it socially, and we want it to be a win economically. I will say that our country hopefully will be moving more in the direction, maybe going back into the Paris, signing on to the Paris Accord, and a number of things that over the last few years we have stepped back from. We know that what we do here in the US impacts the rest of the world, and frankly, what's done in China or India or Asia or Europe impacts us. And this is one of these subjects where if we could come together internationally and understand the interdependence that we have, that our actions have on one another, I think it would be a real boost to, rather than each country or even each city trying to go it alone, because that's very difficult and is subject to, as you mentioned, Mayor Kuhn, subject to the folks who don't believe in climate change, who don't believe that, you know, the extreme weather that we're having in the US. I know you must have seen on the news the fires that we are having throughout the West, the droughts that we are having in the US, the huge storms, the hurricanes that we are having. You know, I believe, and I think many people believe that you know, we're sort of reaping what we've sowed in some respects to that, because climate change has been so extreme. And so the time is now. We have to make these, take these actions now. If we care about our kids, and we all do, whether we're in Germany or whether we're in the US or whether we're in Asia, we all care about our kids. We all care about our grandkids. And the best thing that we can do for them is to take steps to reverse the already damage that we have seen.
Ich möchte einen Vorschlag machen.
I would like to make a suggestion just spontaneously. Now, once we've battled COVID, then maybe we could also, well, have two delegations, one's from Stuttgart to St. Louis and one delegation from St. Louis to Stuttgart, maybe 10 or 20 young people. And maybe they could, well, find out what the other city does in terms of combating climate change, what technologies they use, what measures they take. And maybe in this way, we can also strengthen exchange on this important issue. So we would be willing to do that. And maybe our teams can discuss what this could look like.
That's a terrific idea. I think that that is certainly one of the ways that we can all benefit, by seeing what you're doing and you to see what we are doing as well. So that would be terrific.
It would be wonderful if something concrete were to come out of this conversation today. And so I'm delighted to hear that proposal, and would also like to offer, if there are ways in which the American Council on Germany can help support that kind of added collaboration between your two cities, we would love to be part of that. This actually ties in with a viewer question, which I'd like to pose as we start to come to the close, but it also brings us back to the beginning of our conversation. One of our viewers writes, given the pandemic and the inequities that it has highlighted, do you think that it is important to develop programs which strengthen citizen engagement between the two cities on a virtual level so as not to be dependent on travel? Although there are great opportunities for students and others, what programs are in place when you're unable to travel, and how can you continue to strengthen people-to-people relationships? I know that's a big question, but I think we've got something, you know, concrete already. But do either of you have any ideas on things that can be done virtually over the next 6 to 8 months, because that's probably how long we'll be dealing with the inability to travel.
I think that's a really interesting question, and a good question. Certainly, we could almost have, at some point we will be able to travel, but perhaps we need to do some background work and some background conversations between groups until they can travel. And even through technology, we certainly can electronically show through videos and pictures and drone photography, etc. We can certainly show a lot of the things that are being done. So I think that's a terrific idea.
Also ich kann mir auch vorstellen, dass
Yes, I also think that we will have to deal with this for a couple of months, and we could have a student exchange, for example, like 5 students from Stuttgart, 5 students from St. Louis. They could have like a conference call or a video conference to share views and ideas, and they can of course then also share this with their fellow students. And in general, I believe that these types of conferences even optimize the exchange between us. I mean, of course, there is nothing better than a face-to-face meeting, being in the same room. Of course, that's the form that we should use once this is over, but preparing this and also following up on actual meetings. These types of conferences are a great idea, because in this way you can find out more about each other, and afterwards you can also, follow up, and you can also at some point then meet in person again. So I think we should use these tools, yes, that help us to leverage these advantages of this type of communication, such that the actual encounters then are even more enriching.
Agree.
I often find myself coming back to the phrase, necessity is the mother of invention.
Mhm.
And I am reminded of it listening to the two of you talk right now, because we are experiencing something that none of us could have imagined, and it's lasting longer than any of us imagined. And so it's forcing us to be creative and to adapt. And I'm hearing a lot of great ideas for the path forward. And I'm particularly pleased that this is happening under the auspices of a discussion around the 60th anniversary of a strong sister city relationship between Stuttgart and St. Louis. So I just want to thank both of you for making the time to join us today and to join our viewers. And I look forward to hearing more about how the relationship between your two cities continues to grow and become stronger over time. And in the chat function, the German Consul General in Chicago has offered to be supportive of exchange programs, particularly for students. And I can just reiterate what I said earlier, that we at the American Council on Germany would like to support you in your efforts in any way that we can.
Thank you.
Mayor Krewson, thank you to you.
Thank you.
And Mayor Kuhn, thank you to you as well. Do either of you have any final remarks you'd like to make?
I would just say thank you all for hosting this. And Mayor Kuhn, it's so good to be with you again, even though it's electronically. And really appreciate the time and effort that went into this, and feel like we know one another a little better already. So thank you.
Ich möchte mich aus Stuttgart auch ganz
And from Stuttgart, I would also like to thank our host and organizer. You did a great job. It's a great format, and I hope that we will do this, or you will be able to do this again between the sister cities. And I would also like to thank my colleague also for the conversation that we had the other day. And it was great to have this exchange within just 1 hour. So thank you so much to the organizer.
Well, thank you both once again, and we look forward to staying in touch with both of you. And of course, thank you to our viewers, and we are happy that you were able to join us today. Goodbye, everybody, and have a good weekend.
Bye bye, Lydia. Bye bye.